Welcome to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. I'm Dr. Holly Thacker, your host, and I'm the Executive Director of our national nonprofit Speaking of Women's Health. And I am happy to be back in the Sunflower House with you for episode 3 of our podcast, which shares credible women's health information. Today, I'm going to discuss chocolate, mood, and neurotransmitters. This is our third podcast, and we're actually going to have 3 different types of podcast. One is like the one today, where we go over breaking health information or excellent content that's already available on our speakingofwomenshealth.com digital platform. The second type of podcast will be for continuing medical education for physicians, nurses, and allied health. And we'll be starting that within the month, specifically related to menopause and hot flashes and some non-hormonal options and exciting new therapies on the horizon. And the third type of podcast that I'm going to do as your host of the Speaking of Women's Health podcast is to podcast my book. I've written a couple of books for women. One is Your Body, Your Hormones, Your Choices. And the second book I wrote was The Cleveland Clinic Guide to Menopause. And I thought I would write a third book, but when I took over the nonprofit Speaking of Women's Health back in 2008, I decided to update information on a daily or certainly weekly basis. And once a book is published, it's a little harder to update it, certainly in the printed form. Obviously, on the electronic form, it's a little bit easier. But we want to be able to reach women wherever they're at. And if you're exercising or cleaning or driving your children around, or simply like to ingest information and edutainment in an audio format, this podcast is for you. Please share it with your friends and family. Also, we want to be able to make live events available for women. And in the first podcast, I misspoke on the date of our upcoming town hall that you can register for free on speakingofwomenshealth.com. And it will be at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And this is for women who want to tune in and hear about menopause, ask questions about hot flashes. And we're specifically gearing this in conjunction with the CME medical grant. Part of that was to outreach and educate women, to empower them. And that is our motto at Speaking of Women's Health: be strong, be healthy, and be in charge. And we're also partnering with Let's All Talk Menopause. So jot that date down, February 21st at 7:30 p.m. And don't forget to head to speakingofwomenshealth.com. And for any more information on the topics that we're talking about or the subjects, please head over to the website. And you can search for questions. We have free treatment guidebooks. We have fun recipes. We have breaking health news. Really credible, good health information. But remember, this is not medical advice. So for specific medical advice, you need to contact your physician or your healthcare institution. But part of being healthy and in charge is being empowered and being an active participant in your healthcare and your health and wellness. So with that, we are going to delve right into our topic about what is it about chocolate? What are those brain neurochemicals that make us feel so good? Whether it's Valentine's Day, which will be coming up in February, or in the spring, Easter, or the fall, Halloween, thoughts of chocolate goodies dance in children's minds, and also many women. Eating chocolate does actually help boost levels of endorphins. Endorphins are a feel-good neurotransmitter, and they're released in the brain which is why a lot of people consider chocolate a comfort food. Simply when we eat chocolate, it makes us feel better. And we always say that food many times does affect the mood. So, what are the 4 types of, quote, happy hormones, also known as neurotransmitters? Well, before I get into that, as an aside, as a midlife women's health female hormone specialist, and really there's not very many of us, many that are trained in the field of OBGYN are very dedicated to delivering babies and ensuring good outcomes for mothers and babies, or performing gynecologic surgeries, helping women with menstruation problems and pelvic floor problems, and sometimes cancers that can arise in the reproductive tract. And many people that are trained in the classic fields of internal medicine, family medicine, don't get that bikini and hormonal overlap. And then our endocrinologists, who are experts in all things hormones, it's primarily all the hormones except the sex hormones. Now, of course, they have some education and expertise, of course, in the sex hormones, but in the hierarchy of endocrine glandular structures, from the pituitary to all the glands in the body, there is a hierarchy of what's most important for keeping you alive, and then what's important for helping our species, humans, perpetuate and propagate. So the sex hormones are not necessary for you to stay alive, but they are necessary for, of course, our species to stay alive, for us to reproduce. So hormones that are essential for you to individually stay alive, like, say, insulin, thyroid, cortisol, if you go without those hormones for as brief as just a few weeks, you can certainly die, like in the case of diabetes. 100 years ago, when people were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, no matter what anyone did, the person was dead in 2 weeks. Then we started using animal insulin, and then we progressed to human insulins. And now some people actually get pancreas gland transplants. But when it comes to the sex hormones, the ovaries, nobody is doing ovary transplants. And it's considered obviously natural and normal to have ceasing of the ovarian function, which is a relief to many women to not worry about pregnancy or menstruation. But even though those sex hormones are, say, less important on the hierarchy, they are affecting every part of you from head to toe. So in the field of menopause, lots of people with different backgrounds have come together to study and learn about how these sex hormones affect you from head to toe. And I have run a fellowship in specialty women's health for now over 25 years, training physicians to be experts who already have board certification in their basic specialty, who come and study an additional 2 years. In fact, Dr. Fiffick, who is going to be hosting and answering many of your questions on our town hall on February 21st, is just finishing up her fellowship. And when many times women seek doctors like myself out for expertise, when they feel like something is, quote, wrong with their hormones, certainly many times it is. If they're in perimenopause or menopause, clearly they've stopped having periods, they have hot flashes, maybe have dry vagina, are in the right age category. But many women who think that something is wrong with their hormones, it's actually many times their neurotransmitters. So we're going to talk about the 4 types of so-called happy hormones, which are really brain neurotransmitters. And actually, some of these neurotransmitters are in other places in the body as well, including the gut. But the 4 major brain chemicals that some have dubbed as the happiness hormones, they're not classic sex steroid hormones. Now, your sex steroid hormones can certainly affect mood, behavior, and appearance, but they are important neurotransmitters that affect our brain, our mood, our gut, our perceptions, and even our cardiovascular system. So, the first neurotransmitter we're going to talk about is dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps us with drive, energy, attention, and is associated with reward and pleasure. So sometimes people with very high energy levels, strong physical and energy drives, and those that seek out a lot of reward and competition and high achievement tend to be higher in dopamine. My son, who's a PhD in molecular medicine and cancer genetics, he kind of jokingly classifies me as very high dopamine. The second neurotransmitter are endorphins. Endorphins are called the endogenous natural morphine opiate. So they're an opiate-like neuropeptide that reduces pain and induces a sense of well-being and calm. Many runners who are like so-called addicted to exercise get that runner's high, that feeling of well-being and reduction in pain when they hit their peak. Now, I've tried for years personally to get that exercise high. I've not been able to do it. And my sons, who are all addicted, so to speak, to exercise, say, "Oh, if you just worked a little harder, Mom, in the gym." And I think some of it does have to do with different body chemistries. And maybe perhaps I'm already high in dopamine that my body maybe doesn't crave that endorphin high of exercise. So everyone is different, and it's important to know your own body. And even though I personally don't get that runner's high, and I don't necessarily feel like getting out of bed at 5 a.m. to go exercise, I do because I know I need to, because I have more energy, I have less aches and pains, I sleep better, I know it's better for my health. And once I'm there, even though I'm not getting into that opioid feeling, I am feeling better and I feel better afterwards. So the third neurotransmitter is oxytocin, and it's a hormone that acts like a neurotransmitter. It induces labor. If you've ever been in labor and your physician or nurse midwife gave you Pitocin, that's a brand name medicine that is used to start labor that is like oxytocin. Oxytocin also releases breast milk, and it's also responsible for helping to foster mothering, infant bonding, relaxation, and trust. The fourth neurotransmitter we're going to talk about is serotonin. And disorders in serotonin cause a lot of problems and are common. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's associated with satiety and emotional stability. So low levels of serotonin can lead to anxiety, depression, many pain syndromes, perhaps migraines, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome. Those are all common symptoms and syndromes that many women experience. And certainly the sex hormones and the fluctuations of the monthly sex hormones can also impact these neurotransmitters. And that's why, since some women associate some of their symptoms in response to time of their cycle or pregnancy or post-childbirth, I think that's what leads a lot of women to naturally think it's their sex hormones when it's really their neurotransmitters. So let's talk about 4 ways to boost happiness levels via boosting your own neurotransmitters. Let's get back to our friend dopamine. Dopamine is boosted when you get good sleep, regular exercise, and you eat tyrosine-rich foods like nuts, seeds, beans, and dairy. Boosting magnesium intake also helps dopamine, and you can boost your magnesium intake with food. And if there's no kidney supplements, you can boost it with supplements. And after vitamin D, which was the topic of our last podcast, magnesium is probably the next most frequent supplement that I recommend for women. Limiting your caffeine can also help keep magnesium levels up. Now, there are prescription medications like bupropion, also known by one of the brand names Wellbutrin, that boost dopamine. And this can help with sexual climax. This can help with energy. This can be a treatment for depression. Sometimes it's used off-label to somewhat suppress appetite in people working to reduce their weight. It also can be used in perimenopause when the hormone levels are fluctuating up and down, up and down. That can lead to fatigue. Of course, iron deficiency needs to be ruled out as a cause of fatigue, and iron was the topic of our first podcast. In order to have a sexual orgasm or climax, one needs to have adequate dopamine levels. And importantly, having a climax actually boosts dopamine levels. And that's why a lot of people feel so good after sex. Moving on to endorphins, the natural opiate. Endorphins are boosted with laughter. One of the reasons you frequently hear laughter is good medicine. Intense exercise, as I mentioned, the so-called runner's high. And many times when I see athletes or women who are very dedicated to regular intense exercise, and it's a big part of their life, and something happens, an injury, foot surgery, knee injury, whatever it is that waylays them, and they lose.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we are the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
That regular high boost of dopamine, that can be a problem that needs to be addressed. Chocolate is also one of those substances that boost endorphin as well as sexual activity. Hot peppers and green chilies may boost endorphins. Personally, one of my favorite foods, much to my husband's chagrin, is fried jalapenos. I love hot peppers and green chilies. Now, prescription opiates are very potent and they are very addictive, and they should only be used under strict medical supervision and can be, of course, very helpful for severe acute pain and some types of chronic pain that may be cancer pain or non-cancer pain. When you have prescription opiates that you don't need or use anymore, it's very important that they're disposed of appropriately. And they should always be kept locked and away from the purview of children or young people or anyone who might get into or misuse or abuse opiates. Yoga, and we have several great columns about yoga on our website, speakingofwomenshealth.com, boost endorphins. And meditation and prayer may also boost endorphins. The third neurotransmitter, which is actually a hormone, is oxytocin. And it's not just being in labor or breastfeeding that gives you an oxytocin boost. It's a huge oxytocin boost, of course, in labor and after delivery and with breastfeeding. And that certainly helps the uterus contract and get smaller and stop bleeding. But there's other ways to boost oxytocin. Watching an emotional movie or reading an emotional passage in a book or poem or hearing someone deliver an emotional speech or a poem. Giving and receiving appropriate hugs, pats on the back. And you know those folks, they always want to give you a pat on the back or give you a hug, or when you see someone you haven't seen in a while, or give them a hug. My lovely, sweet granddaughter, if she gets a little injury, she wants you to immediately give her a hug and kiss the boo-boo, and it makes her feel better. And why is that? In part, oxytocin. Sexual climax, orgasm also boost endorphins. We're kind of seeing this theme of sex and chocolate here together, aren't we? And then the fourth neurotransmitter, serotonin. Serotonin is boosted by bright light. Many people feel happier when the sun is out. Many people, especially in climates that don't get as much sun, may suffer from so-called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, SAD. And they may benefit from 10,000 lux of light for 30 minutes in the morning during the Northern Hemisphere months of September through April. There are several medications that are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and they treat low serotonin syndrome such as depression, migraines, and premenstrual dysphoric disorder, or severe PMS. Now, those are medicines generally used in adults as opposed to children, and generally under medical supervision. Foods that are rich in tryptophan, foods such as turkey and milk and tuna fish, may also boost serotonin. And tuna fish, which not only has serotonin, is also rich in omega-3s, and omega-3s boost the mood. There's two types of fats that our body can't make, omega-3 and omega-6, and most of us get enough omega-6 in our diet, but many times not enough omega-3. And I remember being pregnant with my third child, and I craved filet of fish, and I couldn't understand why. Well, now I do, because when you're pregnant, there's a pretty big drain on omega-3, and fish is rich in omega-3. In fact, one of the adjunctive treatments for postpartum depression, of which there's some new exciting ones, and we actually have a nice column on the treatment of new therapies of postpartum depression. One of the nutritional therapies is boosting omega-3. So exercise can also increase serotonin, and with appropriate stretching and strengthening can reduce many pain syndromes such as fibromyalgia. And some of the prescription fibromyalgia medications like Cymbalta and Savella actually affect serotonin. There is a vitamin L methylfolate that can boost serotonin. Before boosting folic acid levels, it is important to check with your physician about what your B12 level is, because if your B12 level happens to be low, which it certainly is in people who've had their ileum resected or have trouble absorbing B12, which is a very big molecule, through their stomach, or who have lost intrinsic factor or have pernicious anemia. If you boost folic acid too much, that can lower the B12 levels if they're already low. And we usually like B12 levels over 300. But L-methylfolate is the active metabolite of folate, and not everyone has all the enzymes to convert folic acid into L-methylfolate. And L-methylfolate supports methionine, which supports serotonin. Conversely, too much serotonin can give too much satiety and can actually reduce the ability to climax. And that's one reason why patients who are taking prescription SSRIs, and there's lots of SSRI medications from fluoxetine, Prozac, which was also approved for PMDD, Celexa, Lexapro, Zoloft, also known as sertraline, citalopram, which is Celexa. There's a whole host of SSRI medications. Many times those do affect the ability to climax because they do boost serotonin. And I've even actually had a few of my patients who take L-methylfolate either to reduce their homocysteine levels or because they are homozygous for the MTHFR mutation tell me that they note if they take too much L-methylfolate, that impairs the ability to climax. So now I want to move on and talk about flavonoids in chocolate. Flavonoids are naturally occurring compounds that are found in plant-based foods that can offer potentially certain health benefits. They are part of the polyphenol group found in plants, with more than 4,000 flavonoid compounds, which can be found in a wide variety of foods and beverages such as cranberries, apples, peanuts, chocolate, onions, tea, and red wine. I think all of those are my favorites. Flavonols are a type of flavonoid specifically found in cocoa and chocolate. So these substances might boost mood and even memory. Flavonols, which give cocoa that strong, pungent taste, may be lost during cocoa processing. When cocoa is processed into your favorite chocolate products, it goes through several steps to reduce the pungent taste. But the good news is some chocolate manufacturers are studying ways to keep higher levels of flavonoids in their products while still producing a yummy taste of chocolate. Now, recently I read a report about some cadmium and heavy metals being in certain brands of chocolate. And even though both foods and medicines are regulated by the FDA, Food Drug Administration, certainly there's food recalls, certainly there can be contamination, and certainly it's always important to be aware of what you're purchasing, where you're getting it, and if there are recalls. We post recalls on our website when we're aware of recalls, and we've even posted pet food recalls on Speaking of Women's Health. So getting back to chocolate, are all types of chocolate healthy? Well, before you grab that piece of chocolate candy bar or that slice of thick, delicious chocolate cake, of which we've got a really great recipe on our website on that, it's important to understand that not all forms of chocolate contain high levels of flavonoids. So your best chocolate choices are dark chocolate over milk chocolate, especially milk chocolate that's loaded with lots of extra fats and sugars. Another healthier chocolate choice is cocoa powder that's not undergone the Dutch processing. Now, Dutch processing is cocoa that's treated with an alkali to neutralize its natural acidity, since the cocoa bean is not a real, actual bean. Of note, there are kosher chocolates for spring Passover celebrations, and of course, lots of chocolate Easter eggs. And chocolate does seem to be a part of so many people's holiday traditions and celebrations. which is probably another reason why many of us love it, because we have memories from childhood associated with it. Well, what about all that fat in chocolate? Not all fats are bad fats. Plant-based fats are actually heart healthy. The fat in chocolate that comes from cocoa butter and is made up of equal amounts of oleic acid, which is a heart healthy monounsaturated fat, which is also found in olive oil. Oh, you should check out my column on olive oil on Speaking of Women's Health. The other amount besides oleic acid is stearic acid and palmitic acids. So stearic and palmitic acids are definitely a form of saturated fats, but some research shows that stearic acid appears to have a relatively neutral effect on cholesterol, neither raising it or lowering it. Although palmitic acid does affect cholesterol levels, it only usually makes up about a third of the fat calories in chocolate. Even though this is great news, it doesn't mean that you can eat all the dark chocolate that you would like. Be careful about the type of chocolate you choose. Watch out for all those extra ingredients that can add extra calories. And while there's currently no established serving size of chocolate to help you reap the cardiovascular, mood, and brain benefits, you don't have to feel guilty if you enjoy a small piece of dark chocolate every once in a while for a mood boost, or even for a milligram or two or more of iron if you're low in iron. Other flavonoid-rich foods, for some, enjoying moderate portions of chocolate, like an ounce a few times a week, is fine. But don't forget all those other great flavonoid-rich foods like apples, grapes, tea, onions, cranberries. In fact, red wine makes that list. And certainly, you do not need to drink any alcohol or any red wine because it's, quote, healthy for you. It's the flavonoids that are healthy. And there's a lot of other ways to get flavonoids. And if you don't like apples, well, you've got cranberries. And if you don't like onions, well, there's plenty of other foods that are flavonoid rich. My husband, who's a bourbon connoisseur, was trying to tell me that bourbon's healthy because it has flavonoids. So again, we need to have moderation in what we're doing. But we all do deserve a mood boost, so don't feel guilty about enjoying a little chocolate or red wine as long as it's in moderation and done responsibly. But importantly, you need to get regular exercise and good amounts of sleep. And yes, sexual activity as an adult does count as exercise. For even more mood boosting, try a chocolate herbal tea. I just got this new chocolate strawberry one that I'm looking forward to trying. Or antioxidant rich green tea. In fact, read my column on green teas and the health benefits of teas. And be generous with your hugs amongst friends and family. And don't forget the effect that bright lights and scents and scenery have, as well as meditation can have on your mood and happiness quotient. Because our motto is be strong, be healthy, and be in charge. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to us today, and you've taken that step to be strong, be healthy, and be in charge. Please subscribe to our podcast. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. So thanks for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode and you want to help support our podcast, you can donate to our nonprofit on Speaking of Women's Health, or you can leave a rating and review. Share it with your friends and family. Thanks again for joining me in the Sunflower House, and we'll see you next time.